Oregon's season may not have ended the way that we wanted it to, but their offseason has started about as good as we could have hoped for. Welcome in, everybody, to a calm, even-tempered podcast here on the Soder Report. My name is Kyle Soder. I'm going to be the host here on the channel. I hope I hope my internet's okay. Let me just get my phone off of the internet. Sorry about that if my internet was a little slow, but welcome into a calm, even-tempered Soder Report here. Some people reached out concerned for my well-being after the previous podcast, and I'm okay, guys. That's usually the thoughts and feelings I have after a loss. I'm obviously very passionate. Some people say that my podcasts are monotone and that I lack passion. I hope that you guys know that I don't lack any passion. So, thank you for reaching out. I'm okay though. So, we've got a lot to get to here. We're gonna go over some of the transfers. We're gonna talk about the outgoing transfers and the incoming transfers. And the big story is the quarterback room. Dylan Raiola is in. Dante Moore is also in, something that I didn't think would happen, but hey, that's probably the best quarterback room in the country. And Oregon has two new coordinators, an offensive and defensive coordinator. So we're going to get to all of that on this show. And without further delay, let's get to the transfers. Let me pull it up here. Okay. So here are the transfers out. Cooper Perry is transferring out. Justice Lowe, Kyler Casper, Darian Anderson from the wide receiver room. So 4 outgoing wide receiver transfers. There are 4 more outgoing tight end transfers. Zach Grace is transferring out. Cade Caton is transferring out. Vander Plug is transferring out. And Roger Saliapaga is transferring out. So Roger Saliapaga, that's a little bit of a surprise. That's someone who I expected to be featured in next year's offense. He was lined up to be the tight end 2. So it'll be interesting to see where he lands. It'll be interesting if he lands at Kentucky, because that would probably tell you that there may have been some promises made by an offensive coordinator before he left the building. Kingston Lopa is the only safety that's transferring out. That to me is another surprising one, because at the time that he transferred, obviously he's going to Cal. So that tells you that he was probably promised some playing time by a coordinator who was in the building. But at the time he transferred, it seemed like he was lined up to be the starter. Now, with his transfer, they've brought in another safety in Coy Parrish, who is objectively an upgrade over Kingston Lopa. Kingston Lopa has all the measurables that you would want. 6'3", 195. Put the clamps on Tyler Warren in the Big Ten championship game in his true freshman season. But they've been able to upgrade at that spot. So, yeah, that was surprising to me, but they've been able to upgrade that position already. At the running back position, Jaden Lamar, Jay Harris, Mekhi Hughes, all going. And First of all, Jay Harris, I mean, I think we all wish him the best because he did not have to play in that Indiana game. He was arguably the best player on the field in that game. And he didn't need to do that. If it was me, I'm on record. If it was me, I would not have stepped on the field. I wouldn't have risked injury right before going into the transfer portal. So that I think that a lot of Oregon fans are appreciative of what Jay Harris did, and he performed well. Jaden Lamar going to Washington, I never really thought a lot of him, to be completely honest. He does everything pretty good, though. And then Mekhi Hughes going to Houston. So that's the running back room. It's to be expected that you lose some depth at running back when your starters for next season were freshmen this year. Those freshmen sort of jumped the line. Everyone else looking around saying that they're going to transfer out and go get some playing time. So that's to be expected when you've got freshmen who step into starting roles. Is players who are older than those guys will transfer out looking for playing time. The quarterback room, Luke Moga is transferring out, Austin Novosad transferring out, and Bryson Beaver transferring out. In the middle of the season, I sort of called attention to some of the things that was going on with Austin Novosad. A lot of people kind of called me crazy at the time, but I think it's clear now that Austin Novosad sort of fell out of favor with Oregon staff. He was demoted to quarterback 3 or 4. We never really got an answer on that, but apparently he was outplayed by Brock Thomas in the coaching staff size, and I just think that he fell out of favor with Oregon staff. Luke Moga, he was one of the best athletes on Oregon's roster prior to transferring. But the passing game never really came along. His accuracy was way off, and with Dylan Raiola being brought in, there's just no clear playing time for Novosad or Moga. Bryson Beaver is the interesting one. That's another one that caught me by surprise. He just barely graduated high school. He's in Oregon's 2026 recruiting class, which I guess that means he'll graduate in May. But he committed to Oregon. He signed on National Signing Day, and he pulled a Jaren Keawe-Sagapolo-Tele, and he's in the portal now. So I don't know if he expected playing time in 2027 or what he was really expecting, but he's already in the portal. And then I don't need to talk about long snapper. Linebacker Kamar Mathudi is in the transfer portal, and that looks like the only linebacker, so good on them. Interior offensive lineman is Lipe Moala. That's the only interior lineman that is hitting the portal. And then we've got quite a big run of edges and D linemen. Ashton Porter, Blake Purchase, Toby Hastrup, Tione Gray, Zadavian Sims, Jericho Johnson, Terrence Green. All of those guys hitting the portal. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 defensive linemen who have hit the portal. And to me, that the amount of guys transferring out at defensive line, I know that they returned all 4 starters, but these were all guys with paths to playing time. if they would have stayed on for another year. So Blake Purchase is probably the biggest loss out of that group, but they have to replenish their defensive line if they want to have a strong group after this entire current defensive line leaves, presumably next season. So I could see a world where there are 4 open defensive line spots on Oregon's roster for 2027. So that is an urgent need, is the defensive line. And then they had a bunch of corners transfer out as well for the reasons I cited with the running back room. You've got Brandon Finney, who has locked down the cornerback 1 spot, and then it seems like they are going to roll with Ife Obadegu at the cornerback 2 spot. So both of those guys will be sophomores next year. So Sione Laulea is gone, Dakota Fields is gone, Jalil Florence is gone, Dalen Austin's gone, and Solomon Davis. So that brings us to, I believe, 28 transfers. Is that right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't know. I think it's 28 transfers. So lost quite a bit there. But they did have some guys transfer in. Let's start with... Sure, let's start with Iverson Hooks. So, a lot of comparisons to Tez Johnson here. He played last season at UAB, statistically had an awesome year. He's a 4-star transfer. So, like I said, undersized, underweight, very fast. Just sort of fits the Tez Johnson mold. So he's coming into a wide receiver that is extremely stacked with DeCorian Moore, Jeremiah McClellan, Evan Stewart, Gatlin Bear, Jalen Lott. There's a ton of wide receiver depth right now. And they've got, like, this wide receiver room is one of the best that I remember in Oregon's history. I can't remember a wide receiver room that's better than this current one. So it'll be interesting to see where Iverson Hooks lands. I could see him being the wide receiver 3. I could see him being wide receiver 5 or 6. So that's an interesting one to me. Andrew Olesh comes into the tight end room. He'll probably slide in to be the tight end 2 behind Jamari Johnson. Coy Parrish comes in. He's probably going to be the starting safety alongside Aaron Flowers. So he's going to be the replacement to Dylan Thieneman. Dylan Raiola comes into the quarterback room. And that was shocking to me. I didn't think that Raiola needed a year of development. I thought he was playing fine at Nebraska. I know a lot of people aren't thrilled with the transfer coming in, but I think that this is great. Think about this. Nebraska has made 2 straight bowl games. Prior to Dylan Raiola getting to Nebraska, they had not gotten to a bowl game since the 2016 season. So that was a dead program. That was a dead team. And Dylan Raiola turned it around as a true freshman. So, poor supporting cast. And let's be honest, Matt Rule being the head coach, I'm not sure about that. So, I think that that's a great addition. And I think that their quarterback room is the best in the country with Dante Moore and Dylan Raiola. And we'll talk more about that just a little bit later. I refuse to talk about punters. Michael Bennett comes in to be an offensive tackle. Another name to watch for at the tackle position is Jordan Seaton from Colorado. He was a 5-star plus recruit, I believe, in the 2023 cycle. Either 23 or 24. But Oregon is top 3 for him right now, with Texas and LSU also pursuing him. And that would be, I'd imagine that's the best tackle in the transfer portal right now. So if they can land Seaton, that would solidify the starters for me. If they land Seaton and just fill out the depth at defensive line, corner, I'm cool. I think that this is a national championship contender right now, and Seaton just adds to that, I think with Seaton that would be an incredible addition. So I refuse to talk about long snappers, refuse to talk about kickers. Just make your kicks, snap the ball, punt the ball. If we're talking about kickers and punters and long snappers, then there's a big problem. If we're not talking about them, then everything's cool. And then Carl Williams being added from Baylor. He's a small guy, 5'11", 170, so sort of seems to fit the nickel position. So he might be coming in to replace Jaden Kennedy, who was a 0-star transfer, by the way, last year. So those are all the transfers, outgoing and incoming. I think that the biggest outgoing surprises to me are Kingston Lopa, Blake Purchase, and Bryson Beaver. I don't think that those transfers out impact the 2026 team very much. I think they can still have that national championship ceiling without those guys. I think they're going to be okay. But keep watching for Jordan Seaton. The wide receiver room looks incredible. And, let's talk about the wide receiver room. Evan Stewart announces his return to the 2026 team. This is something that's been talked about quite a bit. One of the first podcasts I ever did, the first one, was after Evan Stewart tore his patellar tendon. And at the time I was saying that that's his 2025 season is likely over, which there was some smoke around that for a little bit, but it was ultimately at that time. And, during the season, there was a path to Evan Stewart sort of getting played out of the wide receiver room. So I was worried about Evan Stewart not deciding to go to the NFL draft, but deciding to transfer away from the program. But DeCorian Moore never really emerged as the wide receiver one. Malik Benson is off to the draft. And it seems like right now, on paper, the top 3 guys you would put in the wide receiver room is Evan Stewart, DeCorian Moore, Jeremiah McClellan. And I'm telling you, I could personally see a world where Jeremiah McClellan is the wide receiver 1 next year. That's going to depend a lot on how much DeCorian Moore develops, and it's going to depend on how Evan Stewart returns from injury. Now, to talk more about the Evan Stewart side of this in particular, there's a world where he's the wide receiver 1 on this team next year, where he comes back and he's just completely healthy and he just continues to dominate and he solidifies himself as a first-round wide receiver or something like that. There's a world where that happens, but there's also a world where he returns and he's a little bit slower. He's not quite as sharp. And there's a world where he's the wide receiver 4 behind Iverson Hooks. So we're talking about a guy who is returning from an injury that has been known to end careers with Evan Stewart. When I was talking about the patellar tendon, I brought up Drake Jackson. He was a second-round pick out of USC. Incredibly athletic defensive lineman. He did cartwheels, he did backflips, stuff like that. Drafted in the second round by the 49ers. Tore his patellar tendon. His career's over. And he was a starter before he was regularly on the field, and he tears his patellar tendon, and I think he stuck around for 3 years but just never really recovered. He just never got back from that patellar tendon injury. So that's the concern with Evan Stewart. And it's super concerning to see Evan Stewart get moved from questionable to out to questionable to saying that he's returning in November to saying he's returning in the playoffs to just being out for the rest of the season. And Dan Lanning said that they just moved him up and down the injury report so we would talk about him. I don't believe that. I think that they tried to push him to come back early, and he suffered a setback, and I think that they felt kind of dumb for trying to do that. That's what I personally believe. I think that Dan didn't want to say that Evan Stewart suffered a setback trying to come back from a severe injury ahead of a recommended timetable. So we'll see. Maybe that's just some of the cynicism that's seeping through from 2 straight playoff blowouts. But we'll see. We'll see where he's at next year. I wish Evan Stewart the best. I hope that he comes back and he's the best wide receiver in the country next year and gets taken in the first round and makes $30 million a year eventually as a pro. But when we're being realistic, that seeing the setbacks, seeing the yo-yoing up and down the injury report, that's not what you want to see. So hopefully Evan Stewart can get back to who he is. He can not only return to play, but he can return to performance. Hopefully he can do that, but we'll just have to wait and see. All right, let's get to the quarterback room. Dante Moore has decided that he's going to return for the 2026 season. There's a lot of debate about whether this is a good or bad decision. You see a lot of guys like Joel Klatt saying it's a good decision because Super Bowl winning quarterbacks have X amount of snaps. You see other guys saying this Dante Moore guy is crazy. He turned down $50 million and a lifelong dream to the NFL. And honestly, I get both of those. I understand where both of those sides are coming from. Now, I've personally said that I think Dante Moore made the right decision to come back to college. And am I biased? Absolutely. Did I want to see Dante Moore on the 2026 team? Absolutely. But I can still point out why I objectively think that him coming back to school was the right decision. So, let's talk about it. A lot of people bring up when talking about this conversation, I think that the two examples you can look at in recent memory is Justin Herbert and Drew Aller as polar opposite sides. So Justin Herbert in 2019, he was right there with Kyler Murray being the top quarterback prospect to come out of the 2019 draft. And he decides to go back to Oregon for one more year. He wins a Rose Bowl, gets taken 6th overall, and right now he's making, I believe, $52 million a year. He's got a $255 million deal, something like that. It turned out very well for him. He's playing very well. He's behind a crappy offensive line, but he objectively, Justin Herbert made the right decision to go back to Oregon for one more year. Drew Aller, on the other hand, he was projected to be a first-round pick in last year's draft. There were some things that he needed to work on. He could have used another year in college, but he had a first-round grade. He could have been a first-round pick in the 2025 draft. And he decides instead to go back to Penn State. And he breaks his ankle in week 5. So he can't get the redshirt year. Maybe it was week 6. Or maybe it was week 7. Bottom line is he can't get a redshirt for this year. He has to go to the NFL. And he has to go to the NFL coming off of a broken ankle. Broken and dislocated, which those go hand in hand when that happens. But he's just going to be a late round flyer for some team. And, we've seen quarterbacks with gruesome injuries like Jordan Travis get drafted late and never really returned to performance. Jordan Travis obviously just retired. So there's that example as well. That's what you risk by going back to school for another year. You risk major injury, completely flushing your draft stock down to the drain, and losing out on millions of dollars. So now I went back and forth with quite a few people. Obviously, if it's me, then I'm just going to the draft, taking the money, and just getting lit up pretty much. I don't even care because I'm taking home $50 million. But we have to understand that these athletes don't think the way that we do. And what do I mean by that? Well, it's a little bit hard to explain. These athletes, just imagine something that you're really good at, and imagine being in the top 1% of doing that. You would obviously be extremely confident in your ability to perform that task. These quarterbacks aren't just in the top 1%, they're in the top 1% of the 1%. They have lived their whole lives betting on themselves and being right every single time. So, you hear about athletes talk about who they think the best players in the sport are, and they themselves are usually somewhere on that list, and us as fans make fun of them and say that's not true. Well, those athletes genuinely believe that they are the best in that sport. They believe that they're the best wide receiver. They believe that they're the best cornerback. Diamador Lenore genuinely believes that he would lock up Jackson Smith and Jigba if he was allowed to cover him. And us as fans say, that's not a good idea. You probably can't do that. Well, Diamador Lenore believes that he can, just to use an example. So these athletes, they have lived their entire lives betting on themselves, being right about it every single time, and they're the best at what they do. So, first of all, you don't get to the point that these people are at without being supremely confident in yourself. And second of all, when you have the chance to bet on yourself, you do. So that's what Dante Moore is doing here. I would just take the $50 million because I don't believe I can be a good quarterback for the New York Jets. Dante Moore is not, because he thinks that he can go back and do what he just did. But he believes that he can gain the experience necessary to turn whatever organization into a Super Bowl contender. And just remember the way that we talked about Cincinnati before Joe Burrow got there. They were the biggest dumpster fire in sports. They were a horrible team, but they get Joe Burrow, and even though they've got a bad head coach, they've got a bad ownership, they've got a bad defense, Joe Burrow takes them to a Super Bowl in year 2. So, all this to say, these athletes don't think the way that we do. They have complete confidence in themselves. They've been right about having that confidence in themselves every time. That confidence is validated every single time that they step on the field. And they've just learned to just bet on themselves. And that's what Dante Moore's doing. I think it's the best move for him because he needs to work on his deep ball. He needs to work on diagnosing coverages. And I think it's interesting he highlighted working on his leadership. So that might be a conversation for a different day, is what is Dante Moore's leadership style? Does he inspire his teammates? I think that his teammates all believe in him, but is he the fiery guy that gets up in your face? Is he the motivational guy? He doesn't really strike me that way. So I think it's interesting that he highlighted that specifically. But I think that in order for him to have the best chance at getting a franchise quarterback contract like Justin Herbert has, I think that he gives himself the best chance of doing that by going back to school for another year. So this is probably a topic that we'll talk about more. I'm sure that other thoughts will come up. I'm sure that you guys all have your thoughts about it as well. So please, again, comment down below what you think. But I just don't think that... I think that the mindset the athletes have, it's the same mindset that gets them there, but it's the same mindset that makes them a little seemingly irrational to us sometimes. So I think that needed to be pointed out. I'm glad Dante Moore's back. I think it's the best thing for his career, and I hope that nothing catastrophic happens within the next season. And then obviously 2027, Dylan Raiola will probably step in. So the quarterback room is set for years. And I think it's the best quarterback room in the country, like I've said. Now, let's get to the coordinators. Some of you guys might know already what I'm going to say. Chris Hampton and Drew Maringer were announced as the offensive and defensive coordinators for Oregon. Chris Hampton, the defensive coordinator, Drew Maringer, the offensive coordinator. And both of these guys have experience calling plays. It's been a decade for Drew Maringer. It's only been a couple years for Chris Hampton. Hampton did it at Tulane up until 2023, I believe. He comes to Oregon. He was the co-defensive coordinator last year. Wins Recruiter of the Year for bringing in the best defensive back haul that Oregon's program has ever seen. And now he's taking over as defensive coordinator with Tosh Lupoy taking the Cal job. I really like that one. I really like Chris Hampton. I think that if you didn't promote him to defensive coordinator, he was going to get a job elsewhere. And he was going to take some of the defensive backs, the elite defensive backs that he had just recruited. People like Naeem Offord come to mind. What I'm not as excited about is Drew Maringer on the offensive side of the ball. Like I said, it's been 10 years since he's been trusted to call plays. The offense looked very mediocre at times this year. So if we're going off the assumption that he's learned a lot from Will Stein and that he's going to have some of the same tendencies that Will Stein has, then I have a lot of reservations. But maybe that's not the case. Maybe he's completely different. Maybe he was watching Will Stein and thinking secretly to himself, like, this guy's such an idiot. Why is he calling so many screen passes? Why isn't he throwing the ball to Kenyon Sadiq and to Corian Moore? Maybe he was secretly thinking that. But I'm not operating with that assumption in mind. I'm operating with the assumption that he's going to have a lot of the same tendencies that Will Stein had, which a lot of that was great. Bo Nix was incredible with Will Stein. Dylan Gabriel was incredible. Both of those guys, Heisman finalists. But there was just something left to be desired in those offenses. And in the biggest games, Oregon's staff was outcoached completely. Let's talk about the big games. I had a couple of comments on my last podcast. Broku, if you're watching, thank you very much for your comment. He says, 3 years in a row where we've had rematch games with natty stakes on the line and the team has started incredibly slow. The 2023 Pac-12 title was close, but Oregon started down 20-3. This isn't a coincidence anymore. It's a trend or narrative. I'm still riding with Dan, but he definitely needs to improve. People have been saying for a year that 2026 is the year, that 2026 will be Dan's best team, and I agree, but all I see is us going undefeated only to get blown out in the natty by a team we should have beaten on paper. So, I think that he's right. I think that Broku, thank you for the comment. I think that he's right. This big game thing, this win or go home thing, has to be studied more. It has to be questioned. It has to be, like, with this being 2 years in a row where you get to the playoffs, get destroyed, and then lose, it's no longer just forget about it and move on. Like, you can't forget the past anymore. If you would have lost a close game to Indiana, then sure, we could just completely move on from the big game talk. But you've gotten completely humiliated on the biggest stage 2 years in a row. And instead of going out and trying to hire the best offensive coordinator possible, you go out and just promote from within. Maybe it's just to get Dante back. Maybe Dante Moore said, hey, if you bring in Cliff Kingsbury, I'm leaving to the NFL. If that's the case, then maybe Drew Maringer was the right hire. Or if Drew Maringer is secretly a way better play caller than Will Stein, if Drew Maringer was secretly suggesting things that we didn't see on Ducks versus them, that was a way better game plan than Will Stein, then maybe he is the right hire. But if that's not true, if Drew Maringer is the understudy of Will Stein, and he's got a lot of the same tendencies that he learned from him, I think you could have done better. I think you could have brought in a truly elite offensive coordinator that has done it at the top of the sport. So, Broku, thank you very much for the comment. I agree with you. I do believe that Dan is still the best guy to lead this program. I'm not calling for him to be fired. I just think it's appropriate to start putting his feet to the fire. Another comment I got was from Q Valpo saying to lose is fine, but this was embarrassing. So that's another one. Completely agree. The standard has to be higher than getting blown out in the playoff. If Oregon would have lost by 6 points, sure, that would have been disappointing, but it would have been like if they lost the way Ole Miss had lost. Ole Miss lost their coach, they were counted out by everyone, but they didn't lose 56-22. They went out on their swords. They fought till the very end, and everyone around the country respects what Ole Miss just did because of where their head coaching situation put them, what they were able to do after that, and the way they went out. That's commendable. You go out on your sword like that, you go out fighting, you go down swinging, whatever phrase you want to use, that's commendable. If Oregon had gone out that way, then we wouldn't need to spend more time on the Indiana game. Which, by the way, this was mostly focused on the transfer portal, the quarterback news, the coordinator news. I'm going to come back to that Indiana game and the Ohio State game from last year. It needs to be talked about more. It needs to be we've got to figure out why that has happened 2 years in a row. But just with going back to the coordinators, like it's a little bit discouraging to see that 3 years in a row, in winner go home games, you have lost because your staff was not as good as the other team's staff, and you're not doing anything to make your staff better. You're just losing some of the minds on your staff and replacing them with their understudies. So with Chris Hampton, I like it. Great recruiter. He's called plays recently. With Drew Maringer, I think you could have gone outside the organization, done a little better. And I'm not just picking Drew Maringer for no reason. I'm mostly just picking on the offensive side of the ball because that was the one that struggled at times this year. The defensive side of the ball was awesome. Tosh Lupoy did a great job this year. Obviously, the James Madison game got a little weird, and the Indiana game was bad on both sides. But I was completely satisfied with what the defensive side of the ball did. So if Chris Hampton learned everything from Tosh Lupoy and he's able to put out similar production from the defense, great. I'm cool with that. If Drew Maringer, like copy and paste with what I just said, if Drew Maringer puts out similar production to what Will Stein just did on the offensive side of the ball, that's not good enough. So I think that you could have done a little bit better at offensive coordinator. I think that you could have at least done a countrywide search. And if after you do that countrywide search, if you still think that Drew Maringer is the best offensive coordinator at that point, cool. Then go ahead and hire Drew Maringer. But I think there was someone else out there who gave you a higher ceiling, who could have given you a higher ceiling. So, just in closing, don't want to end on a down note. I'm extremely excited for football to kick off again in the fall because I'm looking at the way this is setting up. Dante Moore coming back, Evan Stewart coming back, all 4 defensive linemen coming back. I didn't even talk about that. All 4 defensive linemen are coming back. Just with all the returning talent, I'm incredibly excited for 2026, and I think that Oregon will be a preseason favorite for the national championship. I think that is their ceiling. I think that the 2026 team can do it. In order for them to do it, they need to be coached well. They need to outcoach other elite staffs in the playoffs. And that is still to be seen. Maybe they can do it, but I'm excited to find out. I'm excited for Dante Moore in year 2. I would hope that they are able to bring in Jordan Seaton. I'm hopeful they would be able to bring in another linebacker. But regardless, I think that this team has to be a favorite for the national championship. And Clemson was a favorite for the national championship this year, so was Penn State. Preseason expectations don't always translate. Even if you've got multi-year quarterbacks, neither of those quarterbacks performed well. But the way this is setting up for Oregon on paper, you've got Dante Moore in year 2. You've got a great tight end returning again in Jamari Johnson. You've got the best wide receiver room in recent memory. You can upgrade at both tackle positions. You've got De'Aaron Hill and Jordan Davison, who are a year older. This is setting up to be an explosive offense, and it's setting up to be an unstoppable object on offense and an immovable object on defense. So, I'm incredibly excited. Let me know what you guys think. Please drop your comments down below, subscribe to the channel, like the video. Thank you very much. That's all for today. Have a wonderful night.